death.
I am that I am. I am that am I. Am I? I am.
Everybody talking about gun smoke and death.
All right, folks. I want to thank all of you for coming out to the first Faded panel. My name is Joe LaMonica. I am a partner at Faded. I met Sam, Long, and Ryan over the last 3 years, and we kind of wanted to do our best to marry vintage dealers with the artists. The first man, he's illustrated designs for bands such as Agnostic Front, Cro-Mags, Murphy's Law, and even Prince. Pretty cool, pretty cool. He's known most for his work illustrating the Jerky Boys, which was a comedy act in the early 90s. He was a feature in the 2006 documentary American Hardcore, and his art exhibit New York Hardcore was featured in that documentary. It is actually, some of those pieces are still hanging in our Faded gallery now. I think his subject matter is as relevant now as it's ever been. This gentleman is Mr. Sean Taggart. Second gentleman is a New Englander, specifically a Massachusetts native. He currently resides on Cape Cod. He's illustrated prolific designs for bands such as the Lemonheads, Dinosaur Jr., Grateful Dead, and Aerosmith. He's most recognizable globally for his work with Liquid Blue, the Massachusetts company that's most known for their all-over print designs. I'm sure us dealers have either sold, worn, or will have some available tomorrow at the Faded show. He's most notable for his mural work on the commercial street in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is my favorite place to party, to be honest with you. It's a blast. His hand-painted work is actually featured right there next to Shepherd Ferry and Stanley Mouse. So I want to welcome Joey Mars to the stage. The gentleman standing to my right, or sitting to my right, has designed some of the most recognizable pieces of graphic art in modern culture. He began his journey as a Providence native, which led him to Los Angeles to work for the prolific company Donda under Kanye West. He's worked with artists such as Justin Bieber, Beyonce, Billie Eilish, The Weeknd. Also worked with brands such as Adidas, Converse, Off-White, and Fear of God. His journey even led him to designing work for the White House and the Joe Biden campaign. His influence in the digital world has changed the way we look at merchandise on a global scale. Some of his work is featured right in that gallery right there. This is Mr. Joe Perez. Give us some examples of musicians and artists that influenced you.
So from 93 to 97, I skated a lot around Providence and the area. And my first, I guess, instant of street art was I remember going to the courthouse stairs, and we loved to skate this handrail there in Providence. And there were these black and white stickers on the handrail. The stickers informed me that Andre the Giant had a posse. And I had to obey him.
I was going to say, you better obey.
It was really cool and gritty and graphic, and it took from a different subculture, and here it was, and it was my first kind of intro into street art. And years later, I connected the dots, and I realized that it was Shepherd Ferry, and he was at RISD at the time, and he was doing all this really cool art around Providence. I guess another artist that really influenced me growing up was Pushead, and if you don't know who Pushead is...
Never heard of him, Joe, I was going to say.
He's an illustrator, again, like a line art illustrator, very graphic with his work, and he's well known for collaborating with Metallica. So a lot of his merchandise, Metallica merchandise and posters, was all Pushead. And I guess that leads me into like musical influences. And Metallica and Megadeth were like my go-to bands in high school growing up, because I looked at them as like full package bands. They had the sound, they were aggressive. They were fun to listen to. They had like every song was a hit in my mind, and the album artwork was a vibe. The branding was brilliant, and then I was lucky enough to see a show, Metallica show in San Francisco in '96 at the Count Palace, which was like a legendary show. Fire merch, literally fire on the merch, and it fucking blew my mind. So, I mean, even at the end of the show, it literally, they blew up the stage and they blew up the lights, and they had these like fake electricians up in the lights that would fall down and all these sparks and shit would happen. So it was really, it was literally fire. Growing up, junior high to high school was like the height of the grunge era. And so I was inspired by like Nirvana and Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and all those bands. So I had all their merch and all their posters kind of hanging on my walls as a kid, and that influenced me and as an artist, and then also like my own style. Like I remember I literally had a Metallica t-shirt for every day of the week. You know, it's like it just wasn't Monday. It was metal up your ass Monday, or it was Justice for All Friday. And that was just, it was a part of it. And you can see it like later in my work when I worked with Kanye and did the Yeezus merch and stuff.
The art school experience was great. I mean, I had a really strange one. I was actually a freshman like 3 different times because I had entered Vesper George, which was a small school, in January, took the second half of the first year. The following year, I took the first half of the first year. Then I took the second half of the second year, and the school closed. So all of a sudden, I went around, and then I ended up at AID, and they had sort of said they'd make me a second-year student, and they really didn't. I became a freshman again. It was pretty amazing because I had so much basic color study and design study that I think these things really stuck with me in the end, as much as I fought it and wanted to be doing the projects with the older kids. And from there, that's where I actually met this kid, Gary Ramsey, who was he was studying film, and he was doing abstract film with like 9, 10 cameras, just everything from abstractions to, Mercury 7 astronauts, and he was using that light show for bands in the Boston area. And I got to meet some friends of his that were looking for some logo work. So as I started to work with the bands, it was just like the most amazing thing because I became part of the band. I can't sing or play an instrument, but I could do the artwork. So I could hang out downstairs in the smelly basements and, and talk to the rats and then, go upstairs and rock out. And that's always been a very big connection to me with the art and the music. I'm a huge fan of like the San Francisco era, Bill Graham and the posters, Rick Griffin, all, Escasso, that whole scene that was making those psychedelic posters. And then as I got older, I wound up out in Worcester, we started putting on shows. So I was doing both Bill Graham and the Rick Griffin thing. And that was fun. We put on shows with Dinosaur Jr. Dinosaur Jr. played in my living room pretty much.
I was going to say.
Boss Stones played in my living room many
too?
times.
Did I hear
Fugazi played in my living room, yep. So that was an amazing experience. I sort of walked into like the Worcester version of Warhol's factory. And it was kind of like the Art Peace Corps. So between school and Worcester Artist Group being the Art Peace Corps, and Worcester Artist Group had a very big connection with AS220s, and we would come down and we would share, venue, artists and all sorts of things. And so that was kind of my upbringing, just going to shows, as many shows as you can. Because I got to Boston, I came from out Wilbraham, like a home of friendly ice cream, cow country. And I just grew up on like album rock, like that movie Dazed and Confused, that was my high school. Without the beating people, I don't know what that means. But so when I got to Boston, I'm meeting people and friends that have been in New York or whatnot, and I'm hearing like Iggy Pop, I'm like, this was kind of right when the police were hitting, U2 was hitting. So Boston was a pretty happening place. There was a lot of things that were going on. And we just kept it going. And, working with bands, and some of my friends started putting on shows. So we started doing group shows that started to get sponsored by the magazines or started to make a little bit of money. And it's just been that kind of hot.
Joe, what was your earliest poster work?
It was probably this. I still work with this guy to this day, Chuck White's band, Allison D. Dresniak. Dresniak was in the Rock and Roll Rumble in probably '84, when Till Tuesday was out back in those days, that kind of thing. And I used to do work, for him. And he was a writer, so he got free space in the Phoenix. So I was getting published in the Phoenix at a pretty early age. And that was just a thrill to us. I mean, I didn't do graffiti, but we hung posters all over Boston, and that was our kind of way of getting our artwork out there.
Sean, I want to ask you, how was it growing up in New York City in the 80s, and how did that help influence your art during that period?
As a kid, I really grew up in the 70s in New York, not to correct you, but
Trying to make you look young.
I came up in the 80s, right? So you know, New York is like, if you see any like exploitation film that was shot in New York in the 70s, it's pretty accurate, you know. It was, you know, I don't want to be one of these guys, oh yeah, so rough, and, you know, it was that, but it's still New York, right? So it's not like you're in Toledo where you're just completely fucked, right? You know, it's still New York. So there is a place you can go in New York to get out of that situation. Because I really want to downplay the whole, New York hardcore guys have this whole, yo, we're from the Lower East Side, we're badasses. They're not. You know, I mean, yes, I wouldn't want to get into a fight with them personally, but you know, the cool thing about the time that I was growing up, and I wish I was older, was graffiti was happening, punk rock was just starting. Everything that we kind of collectively know as pop culture now was, and I'm not going to say New York created it because that was in the air, right? It was definitely one of the ground zeros. London was a ground zero. You know, Sydney was probably a ground zero. Berlin was a ground zero. But New York was definitely a ground zero. Now, we had the triumvirate of graffiti really did come out. You know, the graffiti that we know today comes out of New York. Now, Cholo graffiti from LA was happening in the late 60s, early 70s. That's great, but it's kind of, and it's definitely influenced culture now, but it's not like New York graffiti really took over the world in a way. Obviously, hip rap took over, you know, punk rock, all that stuff. So that's the era I grew up in, and I'm sticking to it.
Without giving too much information into that process, can you tell us a little bit about it and where you draw influence?
My process starts with I don't give a fuck. Yeah, and it kind of gets you through, you know, like, I guess if you're younger, like imposter syndrome and just any kind of negative thoughts.
Going through that right now. Isn't
Yeah.
No.
So it's just like, it's like, what do I have left to give? I gave it all in the last project.
Yeah.
And past that, what I really learned, I guess working with Kanye and Virgil at Donda, was just this idea of reference pulling, you know, and images and anything that kind of inspires you. And I'm not talking about like going to Tumblr or like doing a surface pull on Instagram or Pinterest or anything like that, because then you're just kind of you're skimming the surface and you're getting all the shit that's out there that's oversaturated. It was more about, I spent my time at the RISD library. I spent a lot of time scanning jewelry there. But I mean, for the most part, like I look at my archives and I have over like 50,000 scans from that library just alone. And I think 10 to 15,000 from the Athenaeum. What's great about those libraries is they have rare book sections, you know. So we'd always find the references that were out of print, that were hard to find. We looked at like magazines that have been out of print for say like 30 years, like Scandinavia, and it was cool finding the stuff that people had forgotten about, like the ideas that people had forgotten about, and we took those and we wanted to make them new again. And then from there, you know, I guess it depends on like if you're working for a music client or like a corporate entity like a Nike, you know, you're gonna take that, you're gonna move into like execution. So you take your references and you come up with like 2 or 3 different directions, and the client picks like one direction. You go into execution. So it starts with references, and it goes into, you know, you're kind of compiling those references into different directions for the client to choose. And from there you go into execution, and you really kind of have to be open and have an awareness about what happens during like execution, whether it's like you're designing a campaign, you know, you're working on a campaign, you're designing a brand identity. And what's cool about going into execution is a lot of happy mistakes like happen. And you have to have an awareness of just like what those are and where they can lead you. And you know, you could be trying to getting from like point A to point B, but then a happy mistake happens, and you land in the point like X.
One of my favorites I've ever heard is Ralph Steadman said one time that he looks for those mistakes because it's a point for him to do something, basically to do something different.
Right.
You agree with that, right?
I agree with that, and sometimes the client agrees with that, and you hope they do, but and then you go from execution, you get to a final product, but a lot of the time, I mean, you know, after a project is done, somebody comes up to me and it's like, oh, that work was really dope, it's really cool, right? And I was like, in my mind, it's like, yeah, it was a fucking mistake.
Yeah.
But you don't know that. So that's, I mean, I guess that's the process. But I mean, afterwards, when the process ends and the work comes out, especially working at this level, and you have all these eyeballs on it from social media, and the critics come out instantly, you know?
Yeah.
So
Oh,
you go to hate
Everyone
beast.
is one. We all know that.
I don't call it hype beast anymore. I call it hate beast because all the comments.
Yeah.
So instantly you're getting like trash and trolled. It's kind of awesome. And that's where I say I don't give a fuck.
I was gonna say, you know, a lot of times it's
I've learned that.
Love the haters.
Like my worst critic, you know, anybody's worst critic here is if you're an artist, just look in the mirror, baby. It's you.
Yeah.
That's it. You know?
Yeah. This is a question for Joey Mars. Joe, I know Ed Roth, we've spoken before, is one of your major influences. Can you speak a little bit about early interactions with his art and then what it was like to actually work with him?
Yeah, I remember, you know, early days of going to, you know, hobby shops and back when you would build models, and Ed Roth at that point, he was a custom car builder that had, you know, figured out how to airbrush everything and chrome everything and make cars, and at some point he had become so famous that he started painting at trade shows for his car stuff, monsters driving hot rods, and that's a lot of them that you see these days are very influenced by Ed. So we would build these various, they would get out in pop culture, they'd be at your model shop, and you know, some sort of beast driving a vehicle, or maybe not, but it was always, you know, in the garbage, you know, Ed probably influenced the Garbage Pail Kids, which all come, you know, backtrack to Basil Wolverton, but it was that sort of, you know, stinky, grody, underground comics thing. And I just always loved it, and it kind of stuck with me, and it stuck with pop culture. It's in, you know, motorcycles, it's in racing, and, you know, Chrysler Prowler eventually brought back, that was Ed's version of a car, and Ed had a career where he was up and down and all around. I mean, he was, you know, he was famous before the Beatles. He was probably famous 5 times after the Beatles. And just an amazing guy that was bigger than life and loved by so many people. And I was actually home one summer. I was doing a project. I was living in Worcester, and I had WAF on, and it was summer, hot rod, big flaming dragster, Ed Big Daddy Roth.
Those ads, by the way.
And I'm like,
you get a kick
Ed
out of
Big
those.
Daddy Roth is a mile away from me right now. So I went to Green Hill Park, and I looked for like a half an hour, and I couldn't find Ed Roth. I don't know what I was looking for, a 40-foot high rat fake, whatnot. I find my friend Preston. I said, "Where's Ed?" He's right over there. You know, it was some 70-year-old, gray-haired, big dude hucking T-shirts, and he had a crowd around him, and it just. I kept going, and somehow we got on art school dropouts. I was like, "Oh, let's go!" Raised my hand like I'm 5 years old. And he turned and looked. I had on one of my newer shirts, and it was a real custom state-of-the-art thing. It was the first time all over printing it was coming out. And Ed being a T-shirt guy of all T-shirt guys, was just, he had never seen anything like that. And he zoomed in on it, and he came right over, pointing around. It was funny. The thing is, on the shoulder, it had this crazy, very rat fake-oriented rat, but it was brown. It was different. But he kept saying, "Well, who drew that?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "Really? You drew that? Come on, who drew that?" And I went with it. Not till I got home did I realize he was breaking my balls. That was his design. But one of the things that came out of that meeting that
It's a
day,
Massachusetts term, if anybody's curious.
hanging out in Green Hill Park, and we hit it off, and we became like fast friends. He's like, "You know, we're out in LA next week with the Custom Culture Show with, you know, Robert Williams and Von Dutch. Why don't you come out?" I'm like, "Yeah, I will." You know, and me and my wife were about to go somewhere on vacation. Luckily, she's pretty flexible, so we went out to LA, and we hung out, and we did the Custom Culture Show at the LA Laguna Museum of Art, where they had hot rods in the museum, giant Robert Williams paintings, all sorts of Von Dutch stuff, and instead of wine and cheese, they were serving like fast food burgers. And he became like a mentor on some level, but he became like a mentor of like how to handle stuff because he had been through everything. He was living out in the desert. He had become a Mormon. He was still doing his thing. And we just hit it off. And then I was trying to sell his stuff to Liquid Blue at the time, and they weren't quite seeing it. But 3 or 4 years later, it came back around, and they sent me out, and I worked a car show in Detroit with him one weekend, him and his son. I was in the booth the whole weekend. And it was just amazing watching people come up and reverence and just being around all his cars and watching him pinstripe for people. They'd drive the car right in the booth and he'd pinstripe it for them. He'd paint right on their engine.
In case anybody knows, a lot of Ed's old work is actually hanging up in the gallery too.
Yeah, there's some of that raw stuff.
Old and raw stuff too. Sean, I wanted to, all right, we're going to say it. Here comes the hardcore questions, okay? If anybody knows, I'm an enormous hardcore punk fan. Can you please share some of your earliest interactions with the genre?
I'd say my first in-person experience with hardcore was seeing the Bad Brains open up for a band in New York that was called the Stimulators, and they were kind of like the transitional punk to hardcore band, much like the Germs were in LA. So they brought the Bad Brains up from DC because they had been playing in DC, and they were like, yo, you gotta come up to New York. So they brought them up to New York. They were at Max's Kansas City, which was my first nightclub, and I was like 15. And New York was like that back then. You could go anywhere. I could go to the Blarney Stone, which was a horrible chain. They wouldn't card you, no one gave a shit, But I saw the Bad Brains, and they were just so amazing, and I just couldn't believe them. It's hard to really express what they were because they're so unlike anybody else at that time. Now everything you see is a variation of the Bad Brains. I mean, literally everything in heavy music is Bad Brains influenced. It's just, you can't, I was working with this younger woman, and I made her a mixtape, and she listened to Bad Brains, like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. I was like, oh, you just don't know. So it's like the equivalent of, listening to, Perry Como and then going to see Little Richard. I mean, it's just, it was just mind-blowing. And the Bad Brains brought it, and I was signed, sealed, and delivered. And then, Minor Threat, the Boston bands and LA bands, of course. Black Flag, huge, super huge fan of.
I guess, Sean, too, I also want, as a two-part question.
Oh, okay.
Because some of your earliest works were for bands such as the post-work for the Cro-Mags and other hardcore bands in New York. Can you speak a little bit about how those first interactions were, how you met them?
So I went to a vocational school in New York City called the High School of Art and Design, and that was basically, teaching how to be a commercial artist. My parents are fine artists, and I said, I didn't want to be broke, so I'm going to learn how to be a commercial artist. And I unfortunately thought being a cartoonist was going to be my way out. What do I know? So anyway, some of my classmates were in hardcore bands, and they liked how I drew, and I started doing flyers for them. So like the very first thing I did was a single for a band called Armed Citizens. And then later on, I did the guitars for the Cro-Mags was like my best friend in high school. So I started doing stuff for the Cro-Mags. And I was hanging out down there, so like I knew Jimmy Gestapo Jimmy G from Murphy's Law, and he would ask me to do things, and then actually Roger from AF came up to me, and he's like, he really liked my flyers, and they had just gotten a record deal, and he said, hey, I'd love you to do a cover for us, and I was like, yeah, man, sure. And that's really how it was. It wasn't like my ambition was to be a professional cartoonist, and everything just happened because I was hanging out drinking 40s with my friends on the Lower East Side, and and they were all my favorite bands. I was so lucky. I got to do so much work for bands that were like my favorite bands already. So I mean, pig in shit. It was amazing.
This next one is actually, Joe, I wanted to talk a little bit to Joe Mars about Liquid Blue. We talk a little bit about your relationship with them, some of your earliest collaborations, and some of your most iconic designs?
I was lucky enough to meet someone who I still work to this day. If you get down to Providence, one of the craziest shops down there is Shop Therapy. And just an amazing place. And Ronnie, ex-Vietnam vet, so he's in his 70s now, and was just, it created this incredible presence. And I was doing artwork for bands in Boston, and we were, doing artwork around, and we were getting it out there. And then at some point, when I finally met him, I more knew him from his store. I would just stand outside his store, completely painted mural building of just unbelievable Greek Odyssey, psychedelic. It was just unbelievable. And the first day I met him, he actually came up to me because he was a friend of a friend, and he says, "You want to do some artwork for the Grateful Dead?" Yeah, okay, let's do it. So he was a Brooklyn guy, and at the time, where a lot of shops were buying me stuff for these things called boutique shows in New York City. It took place at the Javits Convention Center. And a lot like what we'll go on here tomorrow, people had 10 by 10, 10 by 20 or whatever. So Ronnie took me around to all these people that he had been buying t-shirts for years. And he used to buy them right out of the bag, so when the Dead toured, if the Dead was in Boston or Providence, everybody made their way down to Shop Therapy with their bag of goods they've been selling, and Ronnie would buy whatever they wanted to sell to him. So Ronnie knew Liquid Blue, and Liquid Blue was hustling stickers out of a backpack.
How long have they been a company for?
I'd say probably since the late 80s.
Okay,
late 80s.
so the earlier Liquid Blue days, I guess, when you joined.
Yeah, I mean, Liquid Blue, I don't want to tell tales, but they didn't start out, they were bootleggers like everybody else. And they eventually just could print so good that the Grateful Dead asked them to print for them. I mean, they had, that's how it went down. And so Ronnie took me to the boutique show and introduced me to Not Fade Away, Club Dead, all these people that were printing. And that's right at the start when you started seeing Shepard Fairey there, Mosquito Head at the boutique show. So it was this great changing time. And I was just coming off a really cool poster series, this 6 poster series. So I was at the height of whatever level I was at the time, and we were able to show these rock and roll posters to these t-shirt vendors. And actually Liquid Blue, we didn't meet that day. I just sent the portfolio to them, and he called me back, and I was living in Worcester, he was just down in Rhode Island, and we started doing some illustration work. I thought I was just gonna do some illustration work for Liquid Blue's fantasy line or something like that. We were putting Liquid Blue on the bottom, and then one day I came in to show sketches, and he had some sort of epiphany. He says, instead of putting Liquid Blue really big on the bottom, why don't we put Joey Mars really big on the bottom? I'm like, all right, yeah, let's try that. And it just worked out well, and the way the timing went is a good stroke of luck too. He created a bunch, 2 or 3 shirts before I ever reached a trade show, and it was a winter trade show, so you show your summer line, and all the salespeople really loved my stuff. They thought it was just great, and so I knew it was going to be a good trade show. But big blizzard, so Paul the owner was late getting to set up the booth, and the salespeople just set up with what they liked. So they set up Joey Mars in the middle of this booth, and I had Guns N' Roses, Grateful Dead, and Jimi Hendrix on the other side.
Again, bands I've not heard of.
Yeah. So it just catapulted me to all of a sudden I'm being sold alongside of, those great bands. So that when you're in the boutique shop, and then Liquid Blue got me in malls across America. I mean, the early 90s to mid 90s, if they had a boutique shop or it was a beach shop or wherever, it was all around the world. I was getting pictures from Indonesia, And what was great about Liquid Blue is Paul grew up in a screen printing family. His father printed billboards in Attleboro. So he grew up screen printing, and there's so much technology with screen printing. Sometimes people, you can make it as basic as you want, but if you want a beautiful shirt that lasts like what Liquid Blue has done, and Liquid Blue has changed the industry, Liquid Blue was like at the top. So they came in, they had the high-tech machines, and he had a really good interest in music and art.
A lot of that was cutting edge, right, Joe?
Well, when I first started Liquid Blue, it was just pre-computers. So you still were cutting ruby lifts. Like this is all ruby lifts. This is 12 colors by ruby lift on a 2-color tie-dye on each side. So Liquid Blue was able to take my artwork and elevate it. And that was just an amazing thing. So work with Liquid Blue was like me working, if I was a musician, and working with a particular producer. That they were able to, I work coincide with them, and then they would go, and they had an incredible staff of like these darkroom magicians who would, you see liquid blue early stuff, any of those gradations, you know, they're airbrushing black on acetate, then taking half tones of it and lining it up and cutting all this ruby lift, and then quickly within a year the computers came, and then everything was just being done on the computers. And that's where, at the same time, that's kind of where the all-over print started coming in, with these giant machines that could print like you normally would think a screen print would do, but then they had these flares that would fill the sleeve, and this giant oversized screen print would come down and print these things. And it was, and then the way liquid blue did, like this is all this blue up here, this is tie-dye, and they would tie-dye sand, so they created this element. I had been airbrushing t-shirts, and I had started to airbrush the complete shirt with sand and sky and the whole thing. So it was just this right time of working with liquid blue and their ability to knock it out of the park, and their distribution, because they had the Dead and all the rock and roll. They were taking care of all the rock and roll bands, the tie-dye version of them. So
Yeah, very cool. Mr. Joe Perez, I want to talk a little bit about your time in Los Angeles and working for as the art director for Donda.
Sure.
Can you give us a little, some of your insight into that journey?
It really comes down to your network, and a good friend of mine from film school was hired by Kanye, and he was doing all his BTS, so behind the scenes video work, and this was right after the Netflix documentary, if anyone here saw that, and it was like right before graduation.
Okay.
And he being Kanye, just launched his website and blog, and I guess he needed somebody to run it and maintain his website. So I had always kept in touch with this specific friend because I thought he had a lot of talent, and I knew he was going to make it and do something. And he gave me a call out of the blue, probably like 3 or 4 months after.
You were in you went to school in Los Angeles. How far after that?
Oh, this was like fast forward like 6, 7 years after school, so it's been some time. And he gave me a call at dinner, and he was like, "Hey, Kanye launched these web properties, but he doesn't have anybody to run them, and he needs somebody to fill his blog with content daily. And would you be interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, it sounds cool." So he's like, "Good, I'm going to put Kanye on the phone right now." And Kanye came on the phone.
Okay.
He asked me if I wanted to, run the website and the blog, and I said yes. And I started 2 days later, and I had no idea what that meant or what that entailed. I was doing web design at the time, and so I knew how to maintain his website and like redesign pieces of it, but I had no idea how to be a fucking blogger. And so I learned very quickly that he wanted to fill his blog with the best content, like art design, architecture, interior design, music, fashion, everything, every day. So I had to tall order, and be brought up to speed on where to find all this content. So I was looking at press releases and other blogs, and I started, this is when Google still had their blog reader, like the RSS feed. And so I filled it with like 150 blogs over the course of like 2 months. And I soon found out that it was a full-time job, and I had a full-time job at the time. So I was working 16-hour days. And it paid off because by the end of the year, Entertainment Weekly gave Kanye the Best Blog in the Internet award. So, and then from there, I started designing for him and worked on Good Friday single covers during the time of like my dark, beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy. And then same with the Cruel Summer album, all the Good Friday releases of the singles.
Can I ask you a little bit about the Cruel Summer album? Where did you draw that specific work?
So the cover was inspired by photos, and those photos came from one of Kanye's trips to Europe. So he had photographers, videographers with him at all times. He was like adamant about that. And one of the photographers shot this beautiful architecture and this beautiful dome ceiling. And the girl that you see on the cover was part of this really intricate, beautiful design. I think it was from his trip to Italy. And so we reworked worked that photograph, like I think 1,000 different ways. You know, it's totally different than the original photograph. And then we
16
brought-
hours turned into 20, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then we brought it to 3D, and yeah, it was like it's a whole process. 325 covers later.
Sean, I know there's a lost design out there. I got a chance to see it in New York. Can you speak a little bit about your work with Prince?
So I got this gig to do, I was working for this t-shirt company called Brockham Entertainment, and they did stuff for like Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith, Motley Crue, all the hair bands. And I was doing a lot of hair band t-shirts for them at the time. And then this Prince project came along, and he had done a video for the upcoming Batman movie called Bat Dance, and he had this costume where he was half the Joker and half Batman. And basically the design brief was, we want this to look like Brian Bolland, which is this great British cartoonist or comic book artist who did Judge Dredd back in the 80s. And we want that character drawn as if it were Brian Bolland breaking through some plate glass. And Brian Bolland's like an amazing artist. I mean, the draftsmanship is incredible. I was like, well, why don't you hire Brian Bolland to do this? And they were like, well, he's just not available. I was like, wow, okay.
So great, I'm a second.
I'll take his sloppy seconds, believe me. So basically, I get this gig, and Prince is actually really hard to do a caricature of without it looking like really fucked up. So at
We all
least
know
for me,
Prince.
he's a
art critic.
Yeah, so I did a few drawings, and it took a while, but then I finally got it down. And the only way I really worked with him is that Prince, really had to, he approved everything. I mean, nothing was left to a manager. Like I did these designs for Warrant. I don't know if you remember them. They were like these super sleazy hairband.
Cherry Pie, is that the
Cherry Pie? Yeah. Just the
Sick
worst
of all the worst
aspect
then.
of that whole 80s glam thing. And I did these sketches that were so foul and atrocious because I actually despised the band. And the manager looked at them and he's like, yeah, they would love these. I am never showing them these. So I got paid to do the design work, but I never got the gig because basically it was so appalling, the things that I drew. But they would have loved it. So anyway, I'm in a roundabout way. Prince did not leave anything to anyone else. He had final approval. So that's the only thing I can say is like, okay, Prince actually approved and loved my design. Unfortunately, he decided that Warner Brothers were basically owned him, and he said he was going to, basically, that's when he started writing "slave" on the side of his face. And he canceled the tour. It was going to be the Bat Dance tour. It was going to be this huge tour, world tour. And I mean, when I got this gig, I was like, oh man, I do this T-shirt for Prince. That's it. And yeah, I was like, man, I'm made. Yeah, and no, I wasn't made because he canceled the tour.
But
I do have the shirt.
Now this was right around the era, right after that you actually ended up doing some of your most prolific work, which was for the Jerky Boys. A lot of their media and their covers of their albums.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about meeting Kamal and how you got to doing this?
Again, one of the advantages to living in New York is that everyone comes to New York to make it, and it's funny. All the guys that that went on to do other things that were big were all native New Yorkers, and Kamal and Johnny were also from Astoria, but Kamal would these guys would get drunk and they would just call people up randomly and just give them a hard time, and they would tape it, and then they would play those tapes for their friends.
We all did that as kids.
And we all did that when we were kids, but we didn't do that when we were in our 20s. So they were still doing it, right? So they would call me with that week's thing, and at the time I was doing all these hair. I did shit for Poison. I did stuff for. I did do a couple of things for Motley Crue, but it was like I get Kamal is playing these tapes for me, and they're just so funny. And my wife and I are listening to it on a speakerphone. I was like, Kamal, I don't know how you're going to get this out there. I don't know what you're going to do, but if you ever need art, give me a call, you know. And so they got this weird deal where some guy tracked them down and he set up a 970 number, which for you young folks is like a paid phone number where you get charged for calling this number, and then you get content over the phone. So you would call 970 Jerky, and you would listen to like that week's pranks, which was essentially what they were doing with their friends. So
How would you pay?
I think credit card.
Credit card,
Yeah, credit card. Yeah, and
You'd get what, a couple minutes or what?
I don't know. I never called them.
They were so funny. I mean,
They were.
First time I ever heard that, I had to like make the person turn it off because I couldn't breathe anymore.
They are still that funny. Like I hadn't listened to them because I did recently something for them, you know, like last year, and I'm not going to say anything about it, but I did listen to the old ones. They did hold up. I thought it was maybe me, but it was.
Oh God, some of those voices.
Oh yeah. So anyway, they're like these guys are like the hardcore of comedy. And anyway, to get back to your question, I met Kamal drinking at an after-hours club called Blanche's on the Lower East Side, and that's the thing. That's the beauty of New York, is that people will end up at the same after-hours club and kind of.
Were they stand-up at all? Or they
No. They were jerks from Astoria, Queens.
I was gonna say, smart asses.
They were.
Pardon my language.
No, they totally were. I mean, that was.
They could channel those characters.
Oh my God! Yes. So
My
I
generation.
mean, that show Crank Yankers.
Crank Yankers.
Yeah, that was so whack. I was just like,
It's like the PG version, right?
Well, what Crank Yankers was a bunch of. I mean, these guys went gold. Like they eventually went platinum. Like 3 of their albums went platinum, and every stand-up comic is
a movie.
Yeah, they had a movie. I did the movie poster. I did the book that came out along with the movie, and I did part of it on the subway because I was running out of time to hit my deadlines. And the thing is like these stand-up comics are eating their livers because I mean you spent 20 years honing your craft as a stand-up comic, and these two
Some
assholes,
jerk comes out of nowhere.
these two complete assholes, drunken idiots, come out and put out this insane. Brilliant, so funny. I mean, just so you know, if you know them, they're great. If you don't,
What year would have been the high top of that? Or even when they broke?
Well, they broke. Okay, I think they broke 91 or 92. Yeah, and they were phenomenal. And what was great about them for me, so Crank Yankers sucked because basically it was stand-up comics trying to be 2 drunken assholes from Astoria, and they just couldn't pull it off. But for me, it was great because they brought me along with them, and they had I did every album cover, 4 album covers, and did a movie poster. I did the book. You know, it was really cool, and I think they made a really huge stamp in a weird way on pop culture in America. I was just so happy to be part of that. It was really cool. Again, working with my friends.
Laugh and all the time.
Again, the originals, the first Jerky Boys design is actually hanging right there. Am I correct in saying that?
You are correct.
All right.
Open your ears, jackass.
Joe Perez, I know that you've collaborated with this crazy list of individuals. Did you have a favorite design of any that you, or an artist that you love collaborating with?
I do, and it's like part of the video installation in there. It was Cruel Summer. It was Kanye, and why it's so important to me is because I literally learned more in this project about design than I think at any other point in my career. I had a great art director, Guido, and he had actually been trained in graphic design. I had not. I had a film background at that point. So the project spanned from early May to early September, and I'm not making this up. I worked 16-hour days, pretty much 7 days a week, and I only saw the light of day when I drove my car from my apartment to the studio, and I think I went out to dinner like once during that whole time. And but
A lot of ramen noodles, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, he trained me, brought me up to speed, and Virgil was my creative director, and he's just kind of a fountain of knowledge. And probably the most positive human being I've ever had contact with at that point. And yeah, it was really cool, but it really taught me like my limitations and just like what I could produce. You know, it taught me like how far I could push myself creatively and where my limitations were physically. Because by the end of the project, I was in bed with my legs elevated with pillows, working my laptop, and I had ice packs in my ankles and I had ice packs in my elbows because I had sat for so long that my ankles had swollen up, and I had tennis elbow, and I didn't even know what the hell that was at the time.
I still don't know what that is, to be honest.
So my elbows were on the desk for so long, there was like these golf balls, you know, it was just gnarly. So it literally pushed me in every aspect. So yeah, but at the end of the project, it was also the most fulfilling creatively, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything in the world.
Joey, one of my favorite places on earth is Provincetown, Massachusetts. I know you have a really good great relationship with the shop therapy guys. How did you meet them, and what was it like for them to commission you to do their artwork for that mural? I mean, if anybody hasn't been to Provincetown, it's right smack dab in the middle.
I never came to Provincetown as a kid. I think the farthest I got was Harwich, so I didn't even really know too much about Provincetown. And some friends of mine started a comic book shop in some available real estate that, you know, like this time of year, if something isn't rented, sometimes you can really score a good deal. So they started this comic book shop down in Provincetown. They had been living in and out of there, so I came in to be the sort of the third wheel, and we all just sort of pushed our own, you know, collections in there. And someone would come down 2 or 3 days, you'd live in the store, and you just would party in Provincetown, and then, you know, it's just an amazing place with the dunes and the giant history of arts. It's really so much. It's quite a dynamic place because of the natural beauty. I mean, it's a national park. It's a Portuguese fishing village. It's a bohemian. It's got little pieces that come and go, and then it's also just probably one of the top gay resorts in the world. So during the summer, the population is maybe even 50 to 60% gay. So it's just an intense place, a very festive, and just a very open place. So I came down just to work in the comic book shop, not knowing anything. And my first day down there was like a foggy Monday. Nothing was quite open yet. As I was driving around town, I stopped in front of this giant building. It was painted with these incredible murals, and I just sat there and watched it for days. Just before I didn't meet Ronnie until I was there the whole summer, and I never met Ronnie. My good friend Chuck was dating one of his ex-wives, and that's how the encounter came. And like I say, the first time I met him, he had already seen my art and liked it. And he's the one that said he didn't want to do some work for the dead.
Yeah, how far along in your career was this?
This was when we first came down. It would be the summer of '89 or '90, maybe.
So still towards the.
Yeah, very early on. I had started to I had been working with Chuck White, doing some work for his bands, and then some of his, he was promoting stuff. So I had a portfolio of a little screen printing projects that we had done or whatnot. But Ronnie really, he latched onto it right away, and it was really a whole crew of us started to work with him. And so now it's been, almost 30 years or something that I've been working with him on different projects. And I actually worked with him even in a management role. At some point, he was importing, he was traveling overseas in the mid-90s, and he was just about to go to China, and these women that worked for him told him they weren't going to travel with him anymore because he travels too low to the ground and stays in such shitty motels that they were sick of it. So out of desperation, he called me and he said, "You want to go to China?" I said, "All right, so let's go to China." So we did this fantastic Asia trip through Indonesia, Kathmandu, China. So we went he was chasing hemp fabric at the time, which was very hard to find. You could get either, because nobody was legally growing hemp really, other than you could get it in China. So we went to China in search of hemp and in search of hemp seed extracts. So we made hemp clothing, and we probably made, this is going to be 97 or something, probably made one of the first hemp seed drinks, not even really knowing it. He was he was a New York guy, he was a Brooklyn guy, and he grew up in the deli business a little as well, so he was obsessed with those. He used to sell them in his head shop, those Panex ginsengs, those little bottles that you would have.
Oh yeah.
So someone gave him the name ginseng, and so he made, a hemp extract with ginseng in it, and he made hempseed. So it was a hemp extract with ginseng in those same, so I designed this whole box. So I've been working with him on so many different projects, and when it first came time to paint the first mural, I couldn't even do it because it was Bob Cassoy's work on the building, and Bob had passed away in '96. I mean, this work was in coffee tables. This was historic work, so I just kept ignoring it for a couple of years until one day he was really putting pressure on me. I'm like, we'd have to go measure all that wood. And he was working with all these carpenters at the time, and they're like, well, I can cut the wood. I'll do that. All of a sudden, all this wood was cut, and I had to repaint Shop Therapy. And it was kind of cool. I painted in sections, and it was kind of real random, and that was the first one. So I did 3 installments, and the last one we did was a 33-foot long 3M mural wrap. And it's just, I took some characters I was working with.
How long did that project take?
It really wasn't too long because I had the artwork. I was working with these particular characters on a series I was doing called Cash Money Aliens. And it was just to sort of really look at, USA at the time, this really crazy stuff. So I put together a quick sketch, and then we were able to, because I had been working this very low resolution. I've been working with almost like 6 or 8 colors only. So we took my sketches only about this big, and we blew that up to 33 feet. Luckily, what worked out well for me, I have an art school friend who works in that field, and he had been doing all this stuff, all the billboards around Patriot Place, all that stuff his company was doing. So I just handed it kind of off to them. They did all the math, turned the PDFs and just blew it straight up. Had to take a little bit of guess, but the best thing I can say about working with Ronnie for Shop Therapy is he's really left it up to me. He's never really given me too much direction unless he's had some sort of fun idea that he's really gone. So as an artist, to get to play, and you have to have patrons, you have to have people that support you, and it's so important. So someone like that can go and say, okay, well, Ryan, this is going to be $20,000. Yeah, let's do it. I mean, that didn't happen in his early days, but he still did. He still painted his building. He always had, and his building got painted because the town used to encourage people, instead of just at the end of the year boarding up for hurricane season, paint it, put some flowers or a rainbow on something. So that's how Shop Therapy was born, to the infamous level that it became. So I am doing 3 murals with them, and it's always great working with him and his sons. He had 2 sons.
And they're still there too, by the way.
Yeah.
Next time you're in Providence, check it out. Sean, a lot of what we've talked about, the Eliminator. Can you talk a little bit about that character? I know he's been on many t-shirts. Is that his name?
Are you talking about the devil character?
I'm talking about the devil character.
Okay.
He's had many names. Can you
had
speak to
many
some
names.
of those names?
Name's is Legion.
His name is Legion. that's
Legion.
true.
Is that his actual name? He told me Eliminator, Legion. I don't know what we're doing.
Okay.
He's on the
He's
t-shirt.
on the team.
Yeah.
He's on the team.
He's on the team, and he's actually on a lot of your artwork. Can you kind of talk about how that character came about?
Yeah, that was a demon skinhead character, and people call it the Eliminator, which is weird because
Who made that up? That
I don't
wasn't
know,
you.
because people come up to me, oh, hey, did you do the Eliminator? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like,
In a New York accent.
You know the fucking devil. And I was like, oh yeah. And that's not the Eliminator, because I did this other design for their album cover that got rejected. They made it as their tour shirt, and their tour was called the Eliminator Tour. And the dude on that shirt was definitely more of an Eliminator than the demon skin that I did. So I just call it as demon skin. I mean, I have it's just this skinhead,
But
with
he's-
horns and bat
He
wings.
seems to
and-
come back in your artwork very frequently.
I only brought him back because I had seen, there's been 30 years of people drawing that character and putting out bootlegs of it, and the band itself it's turned into their mascot, which fair enough, that's
To
cool.
transition to vintage, I own that t-shirt, and it took me a long time to get it. So that's why it's so near and dear to my heart.
Yes, well, very good.
Yeah. First vintage handed out of the whole night. I'm proud of myself. I got this one.
Well, I'm proud of you too. Yeah, so it was it was from their album cover, Agnostic. We're talking about Agnostic Front, which is a hardcore band that's still
First
playing.
instance was on Cause for Alarm.
Was the Cause for Alarm album, and it's the character. Like I said, it's been done by so many artists, and I just and the other reason that I did this one painting that brought him back was I had so many people telling me that was the greatest piece of art that they've ever seen, and I'm like, I can do a lot better now. You know, I was 20 when I did that. I barely knew how to draw, and they're like, oh no, that's the best piece of art ever.
I think our funniest conversation at the when we came to your gallery was that you hated the T-shirt the first time you saw it.
Oh my God, that T-shirt! So the collar step on that T-shirt is so primitive.
You're like, this is it?
And when they showed it, it was like, yo, Sean, check it out. And I was like, it's in color. I'm like, barely. You know, like I almost vomited. It was the ugliest shirt I ever saw. But I think, and this is just my memory, I think it was like the first 4-color T-shirt in the New York hardcore scene. Wow. But I know cork sniffers care about that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Like me.
Yes. Good job.
Joe Perez. So you spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. What brought you back to Providence? What was the antidote that brought you back here, and now you're still here? So.
Truthfully,
Burnout.
Yeah. One word.
yeah, one word, burnout. 8 years of working for Kanye and all that.
All right, craziest Kanye story. Can you think of one off the river?
Yeah, I can't tell those stories anymore legally.
I was gonna say. You probably.
It's
unfortunate.
I had to sign 2 NDAs.
Dying to know.
But no, I mean it was serious burnout. It was 8 years of just like that 16-hour day grind, you know. And after 8 years was a long time. I figured, great. You know, everybody else was leaving. Like Virgil was, had Off-White, and he was going to Louis Vuitton at the time. And it was just time to step aside. And honestly, I never vibed with LA, and I didn't know why. And then years later, I asked Virgil when he came here to RISD to speak. Like we hung out afterwards, we got a few drinks, and I asked him just a question like off the cuff, like, "What's your least favorite city to go to?"
Don't even tell me what.
Yeah, because he's been to so many different cities, he's traveled so much, and he was like, LA. And I was like, really, why? He's like, it's the least inspiring city I've ever been to in my life. I'm like, okay, it's fair. So I came back here, I grew up here, I considered it my base, and I opened a studio in Kentucky maybe 2 years later, but in between, I definitely took some time off. I work with music clients and launched a clothing line, so that's my idea of taking some time off. So I found a few interns locally, and they're really talented. I train them, and they're off like doing cool shit in the music industry.
I was gonna say they've worked with a couple of pretty cool names since then too.
Well, I had interns, during my Kanye years, and they're doing really cool shit. They went on to do all of Post Malone's creative direction, and they work with Lady Gaga and Chromatica. And now they work with Travis Scott and all his merchandise and products that he releases.
And they never forgot the train, I'm sure.
They did. They wanted to. It's like a big competitive scene in the music industry, but yeah, I trained a few interns here, and then I met a really talented intern from RISD, and she's working with like Lizzo and who else? Cardi B. And now I'm at the point in my career where I really kind of get to pick and choose the clients that I take on, and I work really hard to get here. I also founded and I'm a partner at a design agency in New York called Works, and we take on a lot of corporate clients, a lot of campaigns and branding. And
any specific clients you can?
Yeah, we're working with like Nike. Actually, we're working with Nike right now on 2 different projects.
Very cool.
Yeah, like Lululemon and a bunch of clients like that. So I just kind of do high-level work, like creative direction, and yeah, life's good. I'm happy, and it's cool.
First of all, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for working with us. We're honored to be a part of it. I'll kind of go down the line and start with you, Joe, to where you kind of got this inspiration for.
I follow a lot of young blossoming artists on Instagram, and one of them really caught my eye, and he kind of was a throwback, and he was really into airbrush. And he's in Paris, France. So I always wanted to work with him. This was kind of like a good, reason to do so.
Hours of communication, though. I'm sure there was a lot of.
No, there was no back and forth. I just was like, I kind of gave him a little bit of light direction. I said, just do your thing. And exactly what he did, I told him this for Faded. He was really excited to be working together. And he literally he killed it, crushed it first go around. So.
Yeah. I get a lot of I was telling you before, a lot of 80s Harley.
A little bit, you got the chrome in there.
Chrome and stuff,
But the whole idea is I love finding new artists, and I love promoting them and propping them up and giving them a voice and a platform a bigger platform for their work to be shown on. So this is a great example of that. I really hope to work with them in the future, like on music merch and anything of that nature. So he was really easy to work with, and I think extremely talented.
One of the things right from the start, I love working with these guys at Faded is their graphic design for their whole concept of the show and where they wanted to go, I thought was incredible from the start. Their typography they were working with, and so when they approached me, one of the things that really was sticking with me was how they were using the word faded and the positive and the negative. And so, as I usually do, I completely ignore everything, and I just start drawing my letter. I've always been a letterer since I can remember as a kid, bubble lettering, peace, love, 4 years old with pads of paper. I've been drawing lettering, some sort of scribal thing. So I was just sitting down, the way I approach things like this, I just start sketching. I really start with, the crappiest materials to start with, 8.5 by 11 paper and markers and, drippy, gooey markers or really dried out markers. And it was really just exploring the word faded. And over the course of 3 days, I probably did 150 drawings. And, there was some good ones, there was something to expand on. And then as a lot of times what happens, I maybe just came down to the studio, sat down, and that whole thing just came out of my head like that with no real thought. But those are characters I use a lot. I love playing with sort of organic shapes, and a friend of mine, we have this concept called Darwin's waiting room. Like if things have been a little different, and what could have happened. So I love merging because within sort of fractals or whatever, or DNA or whatnot, we're all so integrated. So I love to bring and move play the Frankenstein doctor and move the eyeball as the body, and I love looking at plants and how plants grow. And then just coming in with the faded thing. The one thing that I thought one of my favorite things is the character that's wearing sort of the tie-dye t-shirt. And then all these characters joining to lift this word faded and giving it a faded look. So that's kind of how we got there. And then Longston was working with a screen printing company around here, and I think they did a fantastic job on printing it. So I just like to give big props to the screen printer on the project.
Love it, it's awesome.
You sent me some pictures of flyers that I had done.
I did.
And I saw the one which was a Chromax flyer, which had these characters on it, which were actually for a comic book that I was working on at the time. So that was like 1984 or something. And that image has been very tied to the Chromax, but I looked at it, and again, I was like, oh, this is so horrible. Because you were like, yeah, this would be, something like this would be really cool. And I was like, oh, God, that is such shit. And so I said, I know, I'm going to make it right again.
So it's great. Yeah, it's
right.
Great.
Yeah,
No.
I'm looking forward to my old age, because then I'll just look at everything and go, oh, it's all sucked. Fuck. Why did I try? Anyway, so I said, all right, I'll revisit these characters. And it was a lot of fun to revisit the characters. I actually want to do the strip now. I actually had it all penciled out, but I didn't have any of the work ethic that these two guys had, or have.
Glad to.
So you're lucky to get anything out of me. But just on a technical level, what Joey was saying is that he talks about his favorite. Your favorite materials are like grungy, I love doing all of my drawings, my preliminary drawings are 8.5 by 11 bond paper and a flare tip pen. That's it. I don't use pencils or anything. I just draw that way. If I need to, I throw white out on it. But the end result is a brush and ink, as if it were 1200 England. I don't know, like middle-aged technology. I mean, like I'm like so.
This all is.
Yeah. I'm blowing myself up. So essentially, the way cartoonists would have done it in the 50s.
Did it take you a while to get that first Chromax flyer that you? So back then it would take me. So I did that AF cover. It took me a month, and I did an AF cover for them. Last year I think it was, and that took like 4 days, maybe tops. So that Chromax. This is all they get.
Yeah. Well, I'm confident. I can put a line down now and go, okay. And then put the next line down. I don't have to scratch my chin. But that one for the Chromax, it took a really long time because I wasn't working in brush at that point. I was using a Crocodile pen, and that's a dipping pen. It's very ancient technology as well. And it's just I was scratching these skinny little lines, and I was doing back then. That's a real problem that a lot of young artists have, is that they think if you render the shit out of something, it'll look good. And no, actually, that's not true. So I was in that school of thought, and I did a lot of rendering, and the foundation is really bad drawing, but I think I've fixed that. I hope. But no one cares now. Like everyone cared back then when I couldn't draw. So all right.
Told me that. At this point, I want to actually open the floor. So this is going to be kind of like Jerry Springer. I will come to you. You don't have to come to the stage. So if anybody does have a question for any of these three gentlemen, feel free. I'm going to.
So this question is dedicated to whoever wants to answer it. What do you guys think about bootleggers redesigning your original merchandise that you guys have created? And maybe we should probably distinguish between two different types of bootleggers, right? Like individuals, young people, and more like organized, company-driven bootlegs. I'd be curious to see what you guys' thoughts are on that, if you have any thoughts at all.
As a piece of art, I mean, and some of these bootlegs, they're almost like tribute pieces. So I think there's tribute bands. Sometimes there can be tribute pieces. I mean, in the rap tee game, some of the early bootlegs are far better than the stuff that the companies were putting out. So I think there can be a lot of love that goes into these things.
Joe.
Okay.
They don't want to hear you, man.
Is that company like Backstock Co. that does stuff? I mean, that's radical printing that he's doing. It's a total love. The question can come in, okay, the money, royal, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But we crossed over at some point with the cell phones that everybody thinks everything's their own anyway. It's like I think if the love is in it and there's some experimental printing, most of these people that are doing it, they're in it for the love of the t-shirt, and they're trying to just up what somebody else did. Younger, when I would find my own work bootlegged, I would be obsessed. I'd be like, why don't you have the real thing?
Can you talk about the story that we talked about finding some of your artwork?
Oh, I've been out and about. I've been at major concerts, and there's a bootleg version of my shirt they're selling right next to other real Liquid Blue or real band. I'd say, how much is the Joey Mars bootleg? And they just give you a price.
Who the hell's Joey Mars?
Yeah. So back in the day, because I'd rather have you have my work that I put the time and effort in, but now I collect them. If I have 3 or 4 that I have people hunting for them because I think it's a tribute. So today, there is companies that are doing this and individuals that are doing it. But what was Mosquito Head doing? It was a love, and he's like the most cherished, collected thing. So I think it all depends where the energy's coming from. If it's some people, they have no idea what copyrights are, what other people really do, and they're really trying to take advantage of something. And other times it's just the love. I mean, look at all the stuff that comes out of Thailand. I mean, these people contact me and they don't have any idea what a royalty is. You know, it's like artwork, you know, they just want to print it and reprint it. You know, they're for the love of it to a certain degree, and they don't even really know. So it's a full gamut. I think you could come down heavy on sometimes, but other times there's so much love that's been put into this thing, and you want to go out and find some videos of Backstock co-printing. I mean, he's moving the screens around. He's getting all over. He doesn't have an all-over press. He just, you know, you got eight different versions on one screen, and he's moving it around. And I think how it's sold and how it's presented. I mean, he's out there presenting it as a bootleg. He's marketing it as a bootleg. It's, you know, it's a different thing, but so much goes on. I mean, look at what's going on in the NFT world. A non-fungible token. When you're buying one of these tokens, you're assuming, you know, there's rights built into the law, but for the most part, these NFTs are now handing the rights of that character over to somebody. So we're almost getting into it, and I think it all fills the channel and lifts the boats, because if it's done out of love, you know, and somebody at first, when I'm working on an NFT project now, at first like, what? I'm going to give the result, I'm going to give a lot of the rights away? Or
I still don't know
is?
what NFTs are.
But then that's something that dawned on me one night. You know, if this kid makes a movie, you want everybody to make a movie with your thing. So I think you can look at it so many different ways. That'd be my answer.
You know what? You can have my shit for free if you pay my bills. All right? That's the bottom line.
I think, and there can be different on artist levels too. You know, like today, what's going on is that they're not necessarily going after an artist, they're going after like a movie character or something it's a cultural, you've been blasted with it as a culture, and you've seen this stuff so many times. I mean, the Rat Fink is a goof on Mickey Mouse. I mean, so it's parody. When it comes down to like taking stuff, and then sometimes it can cross over to counterfeit, I think some people should be a little careful of what they're doing. If you take an image and you put someone's name on it, like I have bootlegs that have my name on it, you know. There's some bootlegs coming out right now, the Aerosmith bootleg. That was produced by Giant. They produce a bootleg and they put liquid blue tags on it. And my name. That's like bootlegging, that's like 12 crimes in one shirt.
Giant is doing it?
No, overseas, Thailand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You start seeing these things and Paul at Liquid Blue, I mean, they're very protective now, and he has been through the years, but now you see, because all the technology's everywhere. So it's a tough game. I mean, and then, like I said, I just always flip it back to Mosquito Head. He didn't have rights for any of that stuff. But it was a real passion, it was a real love. And then you're being a little punk about it. You're challenging the authorities, you know. At some point, maybe it will. I mean, it almost seems like, you know, as an artist, like I say, as a young artist, I was never too thrilled when I saw it. But now I think it can be a level. So, and sometimes things can take off. You have to be able to utilize that, you know. So if it's this T-shirt that's out there about a particular movie or this, that, and the other thing, I think those licenses benefit in the end. So it's like I say, it's fuzzy. It's fuzzy.
I mean, on my end, I remember Kanye would send one of us out after, you know, during the show, and he's like, "Go get the bootleg shit," and we'd bring it back, and he'd look at it and go, "Oh, that's fresh. How come we didn't do that shit?" You know? But he looked at it as like a tribute. You know, he's like, some of our, you know, the ideas on there were really cool. We kind of took note, but we love the bootleg. And, yeah, we always had it around like the official tour stuff.
It's crazy too in our world. The bootlegs are what people look for now too. It's fun.
Well, it's funny. I mean, you look at, you know, some of the original sort of bootlegs being owned, probably like, you know, the Grateful Dead parking lot tees, and that's a culture unto its own right now. But, you know, as an artist, if someone's out there and they're really banging you and they're actually making money, I mean, I find people, you know, in the 90s, you know, major manufacturers just copying your stuff. And you're like, what? You go to them and they're usually like, "Oh, I didn't know it was yours. Yeah, all right, yeah, you want to work with me?" You know, and you're like, everybody's like, "All right, send me boom, money," and you just move on, you know. And so I think it can come in different ways. If you're able to get these people, if someone's just, you know, all out, just photocopying your stuff and selling it, that's one thing. If you're taking a creative approach and creating a bootleg from love of whether it's the movie or the style or how it was printed or where it's going to be printed and how you're going to sell it, like I say, I think it's
I think there's more
full
like
spectrum. It's 360 degrees.
Homage rather than
Amish?
Homage, H-O-M-A.
Yeah, homage, right, yeah.
I'm
that's-
from Boston, I can't speak too well.
You know, you're struggling to pay the rent, and you see this company over here is banging your shit in England, and you got to go after them. And the best thing to do is to, now they say as an artist, your work's copywritten almost exactly as you do it. But back in the day, every character I did, if I was going to use it, I would send that little letter to the Library of Congress and get your little slip back, because that's the best way to go after somebody, is if you got that little slip tag from the Library of Congress.
Let's say I went to a Van Halen show in 1979. I can guarantee you the bootlegs would be way better than the official T-shirt, and that's good, because then hopefully the band does take notice, like Kanye, and you can use boots as your sort of R&D, and maybe you could even use that as like a way of scouting talent. You go, wow, man, you really pulled that off. I'm not mad. Let's work together. My issue is when people actually take my work and put it on something else and try to sell it. And I've had lots of legal kind of wrangling with that kind of shit. And my favorite is when it's like a hardcore kid or a punk rock kid. They're like, yo, I'm just being punk rock. Yeah, man, I'm just a kid from the scene. And I'm like, yeah, you're 35. you own a business. You're not really a kid anymore. And you're not appropriating an image that's huge and ubiquitous. You're not like fucking with an IBM logo or a Chrysler logo. You're taking my shit, you're putting it on your shit, and you're selling it as yours. And, well, I'm not making any money on it. I'm like, yeah, well, guess what, fuckface? I was going to put out a T-shirt I was going to make a boot of my own boot, but now I can't because you booted my boot of my boot. Prick. So, and just to bring it back to the Jerky Boys, there was a real weird moment there, because I did this art for their T-shirt. We had this sort of like loosey-goosey agreement, and eventually the art got sold to Polydor Records, and I wasn't getting paid, and I basically got $200 for them, and I was like, well, you guys you're about to be minting like millions of these album covers, and I never signed away the rights. So because I never signed away the rights, they didn't really own the rights, because the default setting is the artist has the rights. And I wasn't trying to be a prick about it. It took a little negotiation, because I wanted everyone to be happy, but I also wanted to get paid for the work that I did. And it worked out. And you can work it out in a civil way. It's usually somebody on the other side who has a bad attitude that makes me have a bad attitude. In general, I find that most people are working in ignorance, and I say, okay, listen, I did this, let's work something out. And that's great. But a lot of, when you're dealing with bigger money, sometimes people are really just shitty, and you have to send them a cease and desist letter from your lawyer, and due diligence, because that's the other thing. If somebody bootlegs one of my images and I don't go after them, I don't have a paper trail. Because if I let it slide for like 5 years of people booting this thing, I've lost my copyright, and now Warner Brothers gets to decide, oh, that's the hip image this year, and they'll use it, right? So I don't have a leg to stand on, because I haven't tried protecting my copyright for the last 5, 10, however many years. So, it's a real drag, but that's unfortunately the world that artists live in. I mean, it's precarious, and you have to. It's a delicate balancing act, and a lot of people think if you send them a cease and desist letter that you're the biggest asshole that ever walked the planet. I'm like, I don't tell them. I'm like, look, I'm just covering my ass down the line for when somebody really rips me off. But so that's my deal.
So I was wondering what you would have to say to a real kid who experiences a real life art situation in a class where a teacher centers their art and actually erases it. What kind of support, what kind of personal experiences you might have to share, how not to get discouraged?
I would be very angry as a parent, and as a child, that would be very traumatic, actually, to have that happen to you. I think that's like public shaming. And you definitely, I don't know what the legalities are, but you definitely have every right to stomp into the principal's office and say, what the fuck are you doing? This is outrageous. Because if you're young and somebody pulls something like that on you, I mean, that can really have devastating effects, And in a public place like that, it's not like they said, hey, listen, can we talk about this outside? Can I see you after class and just discuss it? To do something like that in front of that's horrible.
That's your point of view, that somebody else is erasing. That's what makes you unique as an artist. And that's something that should be championed. And I agree with what Sean said. It's pure censorship, and that's somebody else's opinion. And with art, I mean, that's not fair to put on somebody else, especially at that age, who's learning and should be expressing themselves to the fullest extent to find out who they are as a person, as an artist. And you want to foster that, you want them to grow.
In instructional, especially more as you get even older in art school or whatnot, and there's a level of critique where critique can be very helpful. That is more what I saw through the years is you have great teachers and you got fair to middling crap teachers, and that's a crap teacher. That's not someone who can really bring something out of someone. That's someone who's trying to squash something. And I saw that through the years, and sometimes, who knows, maybe that teacher was having a particular bad day, and then within the rigors of school and discipline, things can get confused and cross over, and you wonder if that teacher maybe could learn to be better at a situation like that. It's tricky in that whole art sort of instruction. How you critique and what you do is very, very important, and we all know we've had the great teachers, and those are the ones that stick with us. And unfortunately, some of the bad ones stick with you too. But you learn from that, and it's tough because I think can be within a classroom there can be so many gray areas, and that things can get out of control really fast. But that does sound like a pretty bad experience, and the person just needs to rise above it somehow. It's not easy, especially as a young person. I can imagine. The classroom sort of critique can be a real rough thing. I mean, it's been studied by PhDs, I'm sure. It's very difficult sometimes, and it sounds like that person was just a little out of control that day,
So this was a question I originally had for Joe, but this is also something that pertains to Joey and Sean. I wanted to ask, you talk about going through these 16-hour work days, doing it 7 days a week for years on end. I wanted to ask, were there ever times that you wanted to quit, and why you didn't, or what kept you going?
Every day. I have no other skills. So that's pretty much it. It's art or nothing, And let me tell you, I've had a lot of straight jobs because I don't, like I said, I don't have their work ethic, so I've had to, work in offices, blah, blah, blah. And my last job was a few years ago. I was actually working at Trader Joe's, and it was awesome. It didn't pay enough for the area that I lived in, but if I were to have a day job again, that would be the day job I would have. So I'm either going to work in a grocery store or I'm going to make art. Everything else I've done, I mean, right now I'm doing photo retouching to pay the bills, and that's fine. That's a skill, but actual art, that's it. I don't know. All right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, every day I want to quit, but I mean, at the same time, I ask myself the question, like, I find myself saying, man, this job, this is shit. I don't know if I can get through another day of this. But I always told myself, well, it's the best shit in the world. And that kind of got me through. But I mean, to be honest, there was a lot of burnout, a lot of days where I remember just going outside and sitting in the sun and just staring at the ground and just trying to get through another day. Just like, where can I pull from, like, inspiration, influence, and how can I get through this? And luckily, I mean, I found at an early age that I could create something from nothing. And a lot of friends of mine who are artists and designers are just like, always, talk to me like, how do you do that? Like, I'm kind of envious of just how you pull just something out of the ether, out of nothing. And I was lucky enough to have this ability, and maybe it's because I was, I came from two artists, myself. My mom went to RISD and my dad went to Arts Center. And yeah, even when things got really tough, it's just I could always produce and perform. But I mean, I had a great foundation coming out of Arts Center. They really trained, it was like an artist finishing school. They really gave you the tools that you needed to kind of get through all the rigors of being a commercial artist and these crazy deadlines. And then my parents being artists, my dad being a commercial artist, he designed cars and then toys. And he had that Arts Center background. That work ethic and process was really instilled into me at a very early age. So it really helped me through those kind of dark times of just being fully drained and figuring it's maybe my last project. It was fun while it lasted. And but like Sean, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. This was my goal from a very early age, and it was like this or nothing. I had no plan B, really.
A lot of this frustration comes when you're not necessarily being an artist of your own work, it's when you're trying to work with somebody. So it's important that it's a negotiating process of a weird level, and you're trying to interpret somebody's ideas through your style. So it can be very difficult, and it can be very tumultuous, and there's a lot of pushback, and you do reach that part sometimes where you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know how I'm going to find what this person wants. They're crazy. They're nuts. Whatever. And you go through so many different gamuts of emotion, and it just comes down to the same reason you learned how to ride a bike. It's like you got to do it. You've agreed to get into it. And then what I find, if you're working with the right clients, even if they're a little off the mark or they're crazy or they push you, sometimes you reach a higher level. And that's kind of what's a good thing too. When two brains can really come together and you can combine it and collab it and get it. And if you eventually then get what they were looking for, that's what you want. That's when your brain releases those opiates and you're like, yeah, free drugs.
Given your varied backgrounds, what is your perspective on the state of the vintage market in terms of trends and pricing and overall accessibility?
The vintage thing's been fantastic for me. I mean, I knew that people collected T-shirts and I saw celebrities wearing stuff, but I didn't necessarily think of my work fitting into that collectability thing. And then, so I think on certain levels, the sustainability element of the vintage thing too is pretty cool. That belief of there's already way too much stuff on this planet. Let's just use some of this stuff again. And then for it to sort of catch fire again to another generation as an artist, it thrills me. You know what I mean? When I see somebody, a younger generation, a musician wearing one of my pieces, and they're wearing it for a reason, or someone that believed that it gave it to them. And then for me to finally meet a lot of people and talk to them via social media, because when I was selling a lot of my stuff, worldwide, global, all over this country, I had no connection with the purchaser. Liquid Blue sold everything. It was sold in stores. Occasionally I'd walk into a store and there'd be a owner that I could talk to, or somebody there. If I was doing a gallery exhibit, maybe a fan would come up to me. But now, 10 times a day, I'm discussing an older piece of artwork with a new, younger person. I think it's great. I mean, it's the price thing and things with supply and demand. So it's helped me learn a lot about actually just going forward on different levels. And to me, it's been great. I've loved it.
It made me wish I held on to all my old shit.
It's overdue.
I could have been a vendor here.
The amount of stuff I put out in Goodwill, I supported Cape Cod vintage market.
Tens of thousands of dollars. Never been seen again. Yeah, I mean, it was cool for me to kind of see it pop off, and my time there working with Kanye, I worked with Jerry Lorenzo, and during the Yeezus merch era, we kind of, Jerry kind of brought that whole vibe back. He started printing his logos, like Fear of God logos, on vintage Metallica t-shirts, Tool t-shirts, and then having these kind of pop-up shops. So it was like a collaboration, or unofficial collaboration between him and these brands or bands that he loved growing up and I loved growing up. But it was kind of an effort on our end to put it back into culture a little bit. all these bands that we loved. And we
So
grew
you
up
were
with.
finding a vintage T-shirt and then actually reprinting something new on that vintage T-shirt?
Well, he was, but we were both inspired to kind of bring that
Yeah.
aesthetic into Kanye's merch during
Yeah.
this time.
Yeah.
And it was cool because for me, I always got picked on in high school and I got beat up for wearing all this, metal merch and stuff like that. Because back then, if you wore that, you were considered a scumbag. It wasn't cool. You weren't cool if you wore that shit. And so that's like my ultimate joke and everybody. I got to bring it back and put it into culture again. And it was like, fuck you. Deal with it.
I have zero opinion. I'm sorry. When Joe showed up, it was like, oh my God. And I can't do a Boston accent.
I was going to say, that's a horrible. That wasn't bad.
Horrible. But when he was going through my shit, it's like, oh, this is this, this is that. I was like, really? Oh, wow. So,
Must have taken you back, though, that people valued your artwork to that level.
I knew when I was doing it in the scene that I was in that it was going to be something important. I didn't know how it was going to manifest itself, and I'm amazed that it's T-shirts are such a thing, and I'm like, and like you guys, I'm really regretting all the T-shirts that I let go, and I feel like I don't even have like my mom threw out all my T-shirts excuse. I did it, so so yeah. I mean, I think it's really cool. I like the idea of nothing, of reusing things. I mean, but I'm clueless. This is like NFTs for me. I have no idea. So thank you.
I got one more.
You guys have all had long, successful careers, and I wanted to ask, how have you adapted to the new kind of digital age of everything? Everything is moving so much faster now, and what's kind of the plans for the future?
I've given up. I always felt like I was a part of that, and it's like anything else. It's a learning process. That's what being a commercial artist is about. You're always learning the new techniques, the new programs, keeping up to date. So it just feels like I have to go back to school, keep up with all you kids coming out of RISD at this point. But yeah, I mean, my career really started in digital, and all my work went on Instagram, so I just feel like I'm already a part of that community, and I'm just growing with it at this point, trying to keep up.
I've embraced it as much as I can. I mean, I have slight phobias, but I had I think my first Mac I had in 91 maybe, something like that, 32 megs of RAM, real hacker.
Good old dial-up internet.
Yeah, download the Jane's Addiction video for like, 12 minutes for like 5 seconds of music and going, that's so cool. But they're tools, I love paper and graphics and splatter and stuff just as much. For me because I came out of RubyLift and Razorblade world to come into computer world, boy, it made life a lot easier. To have to try to get color separations made for things before you could just do it on your computer was a giant pain in the butt. And airbrushing anything, but still the real skills, it's your mind. I mean, that's a tool, and you can do some different things with it, but you still have to have the idea. You still have to have the drive. You got to want to do it. That's a tool that's going to take you somewhere, but it may not be as the same as something else, but you got to embrace it. And then it is a learning curve thing. I'm actually finding now it's catching up with me now. Like, this Web3 level is another level where, okay, all right, I'm going for it, I'm in it, but I think I'm struggling a little bit more than I was when I was 30. So whether it's the interactive part of it or it's the interpretive part of it, things don't mean the same thing to me that they mean to you when you are trying to learn how to use a program. When someone said, what's a profile of this or what, I may put in something differently than you, and you get it, and I'm like, well, why didn't it work for me? So it's funny because I'm kind of going through that now. I still use Photoshop. I use Photoshop, but I could probably still use Photoshop 1.0. That's how much I use of it. But I'm able to really work with edit, fill, and all the filters. And because you can then do it and do it at 300 DPI and hand it to any printer, everybody's happy. So, you know, it's a balancing act.
I want to go back to MS Paint. Honestly, you know, let's keep it 8-bit from now on.
Yeah,
I just can't handle this shit anymore.
Just live in emoji world.
Yeah, I just, you know, I want 8-bit music. I want to see gigantic rasters. You know, I really want it to be jaggy and fucked up. I think that's the real aesthetic we should all be aspiring to. That said, I've worked on computers since 92 or 93, and just as a human machine interface, I think it's one of the worst things that's ever happened to humanity, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Well, I guess emotions and psychology are the same. But to your point of working in the world, because this is the world that we're living in, I'm doing my best to use the platforms that are available so that people can see what I do. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool. I love that I can find anything. It's really hard, though, when a 14-year-old kid is schooling you on the Swans when you saw them in 1982. It's kind of like, hey, fuck you, I don't care. Okay, you memorize their discography, big deal. I was there, idiot. But that access to knowledge is amazing. And I think everyone talks about the democratization that this has done is really a wonderful thing in theory. The problem is that the democratization hasn't turned to a monetization where people are actually able to reap the benefits of the work that they do, you know. And I'm all about money. I'm sorry. I grew up, I grew up broke, and I know what it's like, you know. And I think if you do the work, you should get paid for the work. And everything is appropriated, and kind of like there's this churn. You don't even get to appreciate anything, you know. Like when I'm flipping through Instagram, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And then, okay, oh, that's really cool. Oh, that's really cool. Oh, I'm going to say that so I can appropriate it later. As an artist, and these are all tools. I mean, everybody, I'm right with you, it's a tool, but just the physical interface, I have carpal tunnel syndrome as a result. I have all these RSIs, and I don't know what it's done to my attention span, but I think if there was a way where the capitalist world and the kind of idyllic dream of a connected world got together, that'd be pretty awesome. I mean, sharing of information and culture everywhere at once, it's fantastic. I mean, I love it, but it's a weird game because there's nothing tangible, and no one's like filling my Venmo with money. I mean, it sucks. So anyway.
Very cool.
Sorry.
Well, we made it. That'll conclude the Faded Artist panel. I want to thank these three gentlemen for spending time with us today. We're looking forward to tomorrow. So we'll see
Thanks for coming out.
tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.